I knew something was wrong the moment my phone went silent. For 12 years, my family group chat never stopped buzzing. Birthdays, arguments, photos, life. And then one morning, nothing. I opened my messages, and the chat was gone. No warning. No explanation. Just erased. But what hurt the most wasn't being removed. It was what I discovered next. They didn't delete the group. They replaced me. I used to believe that silence was peaceful. At 68, after losing my husband and watching my son build a life of his own, I told myself that quiet mornings and slower days were simply part of growing older. The house had become still, yes, but not empty. Not lonely. Just different. That's what I believed. Until the messages stopped. For years, my phone had been the one thing that kept me connected to the rhythm of my family. The group chat, the Hales was never quiet for long. Someone was always sending something. A photo of dinner. A complaint about traffic. A blurry picture of my granddaughter's homework with a caption asking for help. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. Every morning, I would wake up, make my coffee and check the chat. Sometimes there were 10 new messages. Sometimes 50. I didn't always reply. I didn't always need to. Just reading them made me feel included. Present. Still part of something that was moving forward, even if I wasn't at the center of it anymore. That changed on a Tuesday. I remember the exact morning because everything else about it felt so ordinary. The sunlight came through the kitchen window the same way it always did, stretching across the counter in long, pale lines. The kettle clicked softly as it finished boiling. I poured the water into my mug and watched the steam rise. Then I reached for my phone. No notifications. That wasn't unusual. Sometimes the chat slowed down overnight. People slept. Life paused for a few hours. But when I opened the app, something felt wrong. The conversation wasn't just quiet. It was gone. I stared at the screen, waiting for it to refresh. My fingers hovered there for a moment before I pulled down, forcing the app to reload. Nothing. The group chat had disappeared as if it had never existed. At first, I assumed it was a mistake. Technology has a way of failing at the worst possible times. I closed the app, opened it again, checked my internet connection, even restarted my phone. Still nothing. A small, uncomfortable feeling settled in my chest. I told myself not to overreact. There were reasonable explanations. Maybe someone had accidentally deleted the chat. Maybe there was an update. Maybe. I stopped myself. If something had happened, Daniel would have called. He always called. At least he used to. I scrolled through my contacts and found his name. My thumb hovered over the call button, but I didn't press it. Something held me back. A quiet hesitation I couldn't quite explain. Instead, I opened our private message thread. The last message I had sent him was 3 days earlier. Don't forget Lily's science project. She said it's due Monday. He hadn't replied. That wasn't like him. Or maybe, it had slowly become like him, and I just hadn't noticed. I set my phone down on the table and wrapped both hands around my coffee mug. The warmth should have been comforting. Familiar. But it wasn't. Because for the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel before. Not grief. Not anger. Something quieter. Something colder. I felt excluded. And I didn't yet know why. The silence didn't feel real at first. I told myself it was temporary. A glitch. A pause between conversations. Families don't just disappear overnight. Not without a reason. Not without a word. So I waited. That morning turned into afternoon. And afternoon quietly slipped into evening. I kept my phone close, the way you do when you're expecting something important. Every time the screen lit up, even for a spam email or a weather alert, my heart lifted slightly before settling back down again. But the messages never came. By the second day, I started noticing how loud the silence really was. It wasn't just the group chat. No one called. No one texted. Not even something small. Not even a mistake message meant for someone else. Nothing. I tried to distract myself. I cleaned the kitchen twice, even though it didn't need it. I reorganized a drawer I hadn't opened in years. Old receipts. Rubber bands. A pen that no longer worked. I threw most of it away, but the emptiness didn't leave with it. Around noon, I picked up my phone again and opened Daniel's contact. This time, I didn't hesitate as long. I pressed call. It rang once, twice, then went to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. I told myself he was busy. Work, meetings, life. That's what I had always told myself when the distance between us began to grow, slowly and quietly, over the past few years. Later that afternoon, I tried again. Same result. That was when the feeling changed. Up until then, it had been confusion, uncomfortable but manageable. Now something sharper slipped in beneath it. Doubt. I opened the messaging app again, scrolling through old conversations as if I might find an answer hidden somewhere between past words. Photos from holidays. Jokes that didn't quite land. Little arguments that faded as quickly as they appeared. Proof that I had been there. That I had mattered. I clicked on Lily's name. My granddaughter had always been the easiest to reach. At 14, she lived half her life through her phone. If anyone would respond, it would be her. I typed slowly. Isurat. Haven't heard from you in a few days. Everything okay? Asterisk. I stared at the message for a moment before pressing send. The small delivered sign appeared almost instantly. Then nothing. No typing babbles. No reply. I waited. 5 minutes. 10. 30. An hour passed before I set the phone down again, this time more carefully, as if placing it too quickly might somehow confirm what I was beginning to suspect. That evening, the house felt different. Not quieter, just heavier. I sat in my usual chair by the window, the one I had occupied every evening since my husband passed. Outside, the street looked the same. Cars passed. A neighbor walked her dog. Somewhere in the distance, a child laughed. Life was moving forward. Just not with me. I leaned back and closed my eyes, trying to push the thought away. But it stayed. Persistent. Uncomfortable. Unavoidable. Because by the end of that second day, I could no longer pretend this was an accident. Silence like this didn't happen by chance. It happened by choice. I didn't plan to go over that day. If anything, I told myself the opposite. Give them space. Don't show up unannounced. Don't become the kind of person people feel obligated to deal with. But by the third afternoon, space had started to feel too much like distance, and distance too much like something intentional. So I picked up my keys. The drive to Daniel's house was familiar. I had made it hundreds of times over the years. Sunday dinners, birthdays, quick visits when Lily was younger, and still ran to the door the moment she heard my car. Now, as I turned onto their street, everything looked the same. Neat lawns. Quiet sidewalks. The same maple tree in their front yard, its leaves just beginning to turn. Nothing about the outside suggested anything had changed. I parked at the curb and sat there for a moment, my hands resting lightly on the steering wheel. I wasn't nervous exactly. Just aware. Aware that something I couldn't yet see had shifted. When I finally stepped out of the car, the air felt cooler than it should have. I walked up the driveway slowly, listening to the faint sound of voices drifting from inside the house. They were home. That should have been comforting. Instead, it made my chest tighten. I rang the doorbell. A few seconds passed before the door opened. It was Lily. For a brief moment, her face lit up the way it always used to. Grandma. Then she stopped. The smile didn't disappear completely, but it changed. Softened. Became something smaller, more careful. Hi, she said. Soon. I smiled back, trying not to read too much into the shift. I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by. That wasn't entirely true, but it sounded better than I haven't heard from anyone in days. She stepped aside to let me in. The house smelled like dinner, something with garlic and butter. Familiar. Warm. Normal. Too normal. Is your dad home? I asked gently. Yeah. In the kitchen. And Sophie? Lily hesitated just a fraction of a second. She's upstairs, I think. I nodded and followed her inside. As we walked through the living room, I noticed her phone lying on the coffee table. The screen lit up briefly as a notification came in. I wasn't trying to look, but I did. Just a glance. Long enough to see a name at the top of the screen. Family only red heart. Something about it made me pause. Lily, I said softly. Is that a new group chat? She froze. Not dramatically. Not obviously. Just enough for someone who knew her well to notice. Yeah, she said, picking up the phone a little too quickly. It's just, family stuff. Family. The word echoed strangely in my mind. I smiled again, keeping my voice light. That sounds nice. She nodded, but didn't meet my eyes. And that was when I knew. Not suspected. Not wondered. Knew. Because in that brief moment, just before she locked her phone, I had seen the list of names. Daniel. Sophie. Lily. And another one. A name I recognized, but hadn't expected. Sophie's mother. I felt something shift inside me. Quiet. Precise. Like a piece of a puzzle finally sliding into place. The chat hadn't disappeared. It had been replaced. And so had I. I didn't say anything. Not in that moment. Not while Lily stood there holding her phone a little too tightly. Her eyes fixed somewhere just past my shoulder. As if looking directly at me might force her to explain something she wasn't ready to say. Instead, I smiled. Dinner smells wonderful, I said softly, stepping further into the house as if nothing had happened. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is pretend you haven't noticed. Lily relaxed, just slightly. Enough for me to see the tension leave her shoulders. Yeah, Mom's making pasta, she replied. Your favorite? My favorite. I almost laughed at that. For years, I had been the one cooking that same dish for them. Sunday afternoons filled with the smell of garlic and tomato sauce. Daniel hovering nearby, stealing bites before it was ready. Lily sitting at the counter, swinging her legs, asking questions about everything and nothing at the same time. Back then, the kitchen had felt like mine. Now I was just visiting it. I walked in slowly. Daniel stood by the stove, stirring something in a pan. He looked up when he heard my footsteps, surprise flashing across his face before it quickly settled into something more controlled. Mom, he said. I didn't know you were coming. I was nearby, I replied, the same careful tone I had used with Lily. Thought I'd stop in. There was a pause. Not long. Just enough to feel. Well, it's good to see you, he said, turning back to the stove a little too quickly. Good to see you. Not we missed you. Not we were just talking about you. Just polite. I glanced around the kitchen. Everything looked the same, but it didn't feel the same. Small changes I couldn't quite name had rearranged the atmosphere. The kind of changes that happen slowly, quietly, until one day you realize you no longer belong in a space that used to be yours. Where's Sophie? I asked. Upstairs, Daniel replied. She's on a call. Of course she was. Always busy. Always just out of reach. I nodded and leaned lightly against the counter, watching him stir the sauce. His movements were familiar. Practiced. But there was something distant about them now, like he was performing a routine instead of living it. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I said it. Carefully. Gently. I noticed something today. He didn't turn around. Yeah. There's a new group chat, I continued. Lily mentioned it. The spoon in his hand paused for just a second. Barely noticeable. But I saw it. Oh, he said, his voice neutral. Yeah, Sophie set that up. Just to organize things better. Organize things. I let the words sit between us. And the old one? I asked. He shrugged, still not looking at me. I guess it just wasn't being used anymore. Not being used. As if it had faded naturally. As if it had quietly outlived its purpose. As if I hadn't been part of it. I studied his back for a moment, waiting for him to turn around. To look at me. To explain something, anything, with honesty instead of convenience. But he didn't. And that was when it settled. Fully. Completely. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't a glitch. It wasn't even a misunderstanding. It was a decision. A quiet one. A careful one. But a decision all the same. They hadn't forgotten me. They had moved on without me. And the most surprising part wasn't the hurt. It was the clarity that followed. Because for the first time in a long while, I wasn't confused anymore. I understood exactly where I stood. And more importantly, I understood what I needed to do next. I thought about confronting him right there. Standing in that kitchen, watching my own son stir a pot of sauce while pretending nothing had changed, I felt the words rise in my chest. Sharp. Direct. Impossible to misunderstand. Why was I removed? Why didn't you tell me? When did I stop being part of this family? The questions were there. Ready. Waiting. But I didn't ask them. Because something inside me, something quieter, older, and far more patient, told me that this wasn't the moment for answers. It was the moment for observation. So I stayed. Dinner was normal. Or at least it tried to be. We sat around the table like we had done hundreds of times before. The same chairs. The same plates. Even the same conversations. Recycled into something that almost resembled familiarity. Lily talked about school. Daniel nodded at the right moments. And Sophie eventually came downstairs, apologizing lightly for being caught up in something important. She kissed Daniel on the cheek before sitting down, her presence immediately shifting the energy in the room. It always did. Margaret, she said, offering me a polite smile. We didn't know you were coming. I was nearby, I replied again. The same words. The same careful tone. She nodded, as if that explained everything. I hope you don't mind, she added. Things have been a little hectic lately. We've been trying to stay organized. Organized. There it was again. That word. I glanced at Daniel briefly. He kept his eyes on his plate. Of course he did. Sophie continued, casually. That's actually why I made a new group chat. The old one was getting a bit cluttered. Cluttered. I folded my napkin slowly in my lap, smoothing out a crease that didn't exist. I see, I said. She smiled again. Perfect. Controlled. You know how it is. Too many messages, things get lost. It's just easier this way. Easier. For whom? I didn't ask. Instead, I nodded as if I understood. As if I agreed. As if I hadn't spent the last 3 days sitting in silence, wondering what had happened to the one place I still felt included. The rest of dinner passed like that. Careful words. Polite smiles. Conversations that never went too deep. Never lingered long enough to become uncomfortable. But beneath it all, I was watching. Listening. Not to what they said, but to what they avoided. Daniel never once mentioned the group chat again. Sophie didn't invite me into it. Lily stayed unusually quiet, her eyes moving between us as if she could feel something shifting, but didn't yet understand what it was. And me? I stopped trying to fit into the space they had already decided I no longer belonged in. By the time dessert was served, something inside me had changed. Not broken. Not hardened. Just adjusted. Because I realized something important as I sat there, surrounded by people who called themselves my family. I had been thinking about this all wrong. I had been waiting for an explanation. Waiting for permission. Waiting for them to fix something they had very clearly chosen. But the truth was, they weren't going to fix it. Because to them, nothing was broken. Only replaced. I excused myself shortly after that. No one stopped me. No one asked me to stay longer. Daniel walked me to the door, giving me a quick hug that felt more like habit than emotion. Drive safe, Mom, he said. I will, I replied. And as I stepped outside into the cool evening air, I felt something settle into place inside me. A decision. Quiet. Clear. Final. If they could create a space without me, then I could create one of my own. And this time, I wouldn't be waiting to be included. I didn't rush into it. For the first time in days, maybe longer, I wasn't reacting. I wasn't trying to catch up, or fix something, or make sense of their silence. I was thinking. That night, after I got home, I didn't turn on the television. I didn't distract myself with routine or noise. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table with my phone in front of me, the screen dark, reflecting a version of me I hadn't really looked at in a long time. Calm. Not hurt the way I expected to be. Just clear. They had created a space without me. Not out of necessity. Not by accident. But by choice. And the more I replayed the evening in my mind, the careful words, the polite smiles, the way Sophie explained everything as if it were perfectly reasonable, the more I understood something I hadn't wanted to admit before. This wasn't about a group chat. It was about control. Who gets included? who gets heard, who gets to shape the story. And for a long time, I had allowed myself to slowly fade out of that space, telling myself it was natural, that younger voices take over, that families evolve. But this wasn't evolution. This was replacement. I picked up my phone. My thumb hovered over the messaging app for a moment before I opened it. The empty space where the hails used to be still felt strange, like a missing piece you keep instinctively reaching for. I didn't scroll. I didn't search. Instead, I tapped the small icon in the corner. Create new message. A blank screen appeared. Empty. Waiting. I stared at it for a long moment, feeling the weight of what I was about to do. Not because it was difficult, but because it was intentional. This time, I wasn't being added. I was choosing. The first name came easily. Lily. My granddaughter. Not because she was convenient, but because she still looked at me like I mattered. Even if she didn't yet understand what was happening around her. I added her. Then I paused. Because the next name mattered. This wasn't about recreating what I had lost. It was about building something different. Something honest. Something they couldn't quietly erase. My mind drifted back years, decades even, to a name that hadn't been spoken in that house without tension. A presence that had been carefully edited out of conversations, explained away in simplified versions of the past. A man who, according to Sophie, had walked away and never looked back. A man I knew wasn't that simple. My finger hovered over the contact list. Then stopped. Richard Hale. Daniel's father. My ex-husband. The man who had been absent long enough to become a story, instead of a person. I hadn't spoken to him in years. Not out of anger. Just distance. But something told me this wasn't random. If Sophie had built her version of the family by choosing who belonged, then I would build mine by choosing who had been left out. I added his name. The screen shifted. 3 members. No noise. No history. No expectations. Just a blank space, waiting to be filled. At the top it asked for a name. I didn't hesitate this time. I typed slowly. The truth. Then I looked at the empty message bar beneath it. And for the first time since the silence began, I felt in control. I stared at the empty message bar for a long time. It's strange how something so small, a blinking cursor on a screen, can feel so heavy. Like it's waiting for the exact right words. Like once you press send, there's no taking it back. For years, I had chosen my words carefully, softly, patiently. I had learned how to keep peace in a family that no longer felt peaceful. How to say just enough without saying too much. How to stay present without becoming inconvenient. But this wasn't that kind of moment. This wasn't about keeping anything comfortable. This was about being clear. My fingers rested lightly on the keyboard. Then slowly, I began to type. Asterisk. I think it's time we talk about what really happened to this family. Asterisk. I read the sentence twice. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't accusatory. But it wasn't safe either. And that was exactly the point. For a second, I hesitated. Not because I was unsure, but because I understood what this message would do. It would open something. Something that had been closed for years. Something everyone else seemed content to leave buried. I pressed send. The message appeared instantly beneath my name. Delivered. Then silence. Of course. It was late. Nearly 10 in the evening. Lily was probably in her room. Richard. I had no idea where he was, or what kind of life he was living now. For all I knew, he might not even recognize my number anymore. Still I waited. Not anxiously. Just attentively. A minute passed. Then 2. Then. A small notification appeared. Lily is typing. My breath slowed, almost instinctively. The 3 dots flickered on and off, like she was starting and stopping, unsure what to say. Finally her message came through. Asterisk. Grandma, what is this group? Asterisk. Simple. Careful. Confused. I could almost hear her voice in it. I didn't reply immediately. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I wanted her to sit with the question for a moment. To feel that something was different. Before I could respond, another notification appeared. This time it wasn't Lily. It was a name I hadn't seen light up my phone in years. Richard Hale. For a brief second my heart skipped. Not from fear, not from regret, but from the weight of memory. Then his message appeared. Asterisk Margaret. Asterisk. Just my name. Nothing else. No greeting. No confusión. Just recognition. I hadn't realized how much that would matter. I exhaled slowly and leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen as the past and present seemed to collide in that one small space. Lily. Richard. Two people who in very different ways had been pushed to the edges of the same family. And now here they were. Together. Because of me. Another message from Lily appeared. Asterisk, is Dad in this group? Asterisk. I glanced at the participant list. No. He wasn't. Not yet. I typed back slowly this time. Asterisco no. Squeakheart. This one is different. Asterisk. The typing bubble appeared again almost immediately. Asterisk, different how? Asterisk. I looked at her question for a long moment. Then I smiled, just slightly, because for the first time since all of this began, someone was asking, and I was finally ready to answer. I didn't answer Lily right away. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I wanted to choose the right moment. The right tone. This wasn't just a conversation anymore. It was a shift. And shifts, if done too quickly, can break things instead of revealing them. I set the phone down for a moment, and let the silence settle. Not the kind of silence I had been forced into over the past few days, but a different one. A chosen silence. Then I picked it back up. 3 messages sat there waiting. Lily's question. Richard's quiet recognition. And beneath them, the blinking cursor, still patient. I decided to start with Lily. Different means honest. I typed. I watched the message appear on the screen, simple and steady. The typing bubble came back almost instantly. Asterisk, honest about what? Asterisk. Before I could answer, another message appeared. This time from Richard. Asterisk. I think I deserve to know why I'm here, Margaret. Asterisk. His tone hadn't changed much over the years. Direct. Controlled. Never more words than necessary. For a moment, I leaned back in my chair, staring at both of their messages. A teenager searching for clarity. A man who had lived long enough without it. And me, standing somewhere in the middle, holding pieces of a story that had been told too many times, just never truthfully. I exhaled slowly and began typing again. Asterisk. You're both here because you've only ever been told parts of the story. Asterisk. I paused, then added. Asterisk. And I think it's time someone told the whole thing. Asterisk. This time the silence lasted longer. No typing babbles. No immediate replies. I could almost feel the weight of the words settling on the other side of the screen. Then Lily responded. Asterisk about Grandpa? Asterisk. I smiled faintly at the word. Grandpa. Not Richard. Not that man. Just Grandpa. About everything. I typed back. There was a pause. Then Richard replied. Asterisk, be careful, Margaret. Asterisk. I raised an eyebrow slightly at that. Not a warning exactly, but not encouragement either. I understood what he meant. Once you start telling the truth, you don't always get to control where it leads. I typed again, slower this time. Asterisk, I've been careful for years. Asterisk. Asterisk, look where that got us. Asterisk. That seemed to land. The typing bubble appeared under his name, then disappeared. Came back again. Stopped. For a man who rarely hesitated. That told me everything I needed to know. Then finally. Asterisk. What do you want to say? Asterisk. I glanced at Lily's name. She was still there. Still reading. Still waiting. And I realized something important in that moment. This wasn't about defending the past. It wasn't about blaming anyone. It was about correcting something that had been quietly rewritten over time. Something that had shaped how this family saw itself. And each other. I rested my fingers on the screen and began typing again. Asterisk. You didn't leave the way they said you did. Asterisk. I hit send. The message appeared. And for a second, everything stopped. No movement. No response. Just stillness. Then Lily's reply came through. Faster than I expected. Asterisk. What do you mean? Asterisk. And beneath it, almost immediately after. Richard. Asterisk Margaret. Asterisk. Just my name again. But this time it carried something different. Not confusion. Not distance. Something closer to tension. I looked at the screen, at the words I had just sent, and felt something shift again. Not in them. In me. Because the truth had a way of doing that. Once you said it out loud. Even in something as small as a message. You couldn't take it back. And more importantly, you didn't want to. For a long moment, no one said anything. The messages just sat there. Mine quiet, direct, impossible to misunderstand. Lily's, curious, immediate. Richard's heavy, restrained. I could almost feel the tension through the screen. Then Lily typed again. Asterisk, Mom said he left because he didn't care about us. Asterisk. I read the sentence slowly, carefully. Not because it surprised me, but because it didn't. That version of the story had been building for years. Quietly. Repeated in small ways. Adjusted just enough each time to make it sound simple, clean, understandable, and completely incomplete. I rested my fingers on the phone and began to type. Asterisk, that's not the whole truth. Asterisk. I paused. Then added. Asterisk, not even close. Asterisk. The typing bubble appeared under Lily's name almost instantly. Asterisk, then what is? Asterisk. Before I could answer, Richard's message came through. Asterisk, you don't have to do this. Asterisk. I stared at his words for a moment. There it was again. That instinct. To keep things contained. Quiet. Manageable. The same instinct that had kept everything buried for so long. I replied to him first. Ido. Asterisk. 3 simple words. No explicación. No apology. Because this time, I wasn't asking for permission. Then I turned back to Lily. My granddaughter. The one who had grown up inside a version of this family that had already been rewritten before she was old enough to question it. I typed slowly. Asterisk. Your grandfather didn't leave because he didn't care. Asterisk. The message sent. The silence returned. Then. Asterisk. Then why did he leave? Asterisk, Lily asked. I exhaled softly. This was the part people avoided. Not because it was complicated, but because it was uncomfortable. And uncomfortable truths don't fit well into neat family stories. I continued. Asterisk, he left because things in this family weren't what they looked like. Asterisk. Another pause. Then Lily. Asterisk, what does that mean? Asterisk. I could feel her confusion. Her curiosity. The way her understanding was starting to stretch beyond what she had been told. I glanced at Richard's name. He hadn't said anything else. But he hadn't left either. That mattered. I typed again. Asterisk, it means people made choices. Hard ones. Asterisk. Asterisk, and instead of explaining them honestly, they simplified them. Asterisk. The dots appeared under Lily's name again. Stopped. Started. Then. Stan som om leid. Asterisk. The question hung there. Sharp. Direct. Too simple for what it carried. I didn't answer it the way she expected. Asterisk. Your mother told the version she believed. Asterisk. I let that sit for a second. Then added. Asterisk. But belief doesn't always mean truth. Asterisk. This time the silence lasted longer. Long enough for something deeper to settle in. And then finally, Richard spoke. Asterisk. You're going to confuse her. Asterisk. I read his message twice. Not because I disagreed, but because I understood. Confusion was uncomfortable. It shakes things. Forces people to look closer. But it also opens the door to something else. I typed one last message. Asterisk. She deserves to understand her own family. Asterisk. And this time, no one replied right away. Because the story they had all been living in was starting to crack. The response didn't come from the group. It came from inside the house. I was still sitting at my kitchen table, phone in hand, when my screen suddenly lit up. Not with a message, but with a call. Daniel. For a second, I just stared at his name. He hadn't called me in days. Now suddenly, he was. I let it ring once, twice. Then I answered. Hello. There was no greeting on the other end. Just a breath. Tight. Controlled. Mom, he said finally. What are you doing? I leaned back slightly in my chair, my eyes drifting to the window as if the calm outside could steady the tension I heard in his voice. I'm sitting at home, I replied evenly. Why? You know what I mean. There it was. Not confusion. Not curiosity. Accusation. I said nothing. He exhaled sharply. Sophie just showed me the messages, he continued. The group you made. With Lily. And, he paused, like the next word was harder to say than it should have been. Him. Richard. Of course she had found out. Sophie always found out. I see, I said quietly. Mom, what is this? Daniel asked. Why would you bring him into this? After everything. After everything. I closed my eyes for a brief moment. There it was again. The version of the past he had been given. The version he had accepted. I didn't bring anything into this, Daniel. I said calmly. I just stopped pretending it didn't exist. That's not fair, he snapped. You're confusing Lily. She just came to us asking questions. Questions she shouldn't even be thinking about. Questions she shouldn't be thinking about. I repeated that in my mind. Slowly. Carefully. She's thinking about them because no one ever answered them, I replied. That's not your decision to make, he shot back. For a moment, silence stretched between us. Heavy. Unavoidable. Then I asked quietly. Was it yours? That stopped him. I could hear it. The shift on the other end. The moment his certainty faltered, just slightly. You don't understand, he said, his voice lower now. There are things you don't know. I almost smiled. That goes both ways, I said. Another pause. Longer this time. Then finally, this isn't helping, Daniel said. Sophie's upset. Lily's confused. And now you've dragged him back into something that was already settled. Settled. I opened my eyes again and looked at my phone. At the quiet screen. At the messages still waiting in that small group I had created. Nothing about this felt settled. It was never settled, I said softly. It was just silenced. His breath caught slightly. Not loud. But enough. You need to stop this, he said after a moment. Delete the group. Let things go back to normal. Normal. I let the word sit there. Turn it over in my mind. Examine it for what it really meant. Normal meant silence. Normal meant exclusion. Normal meant accepting a version of the family where I no longer existed. I don't think I will, I said. The quiet confidence in my voice surprised even me. Mom. No, I interrupted, not raising my voice but not softening either. You made a choice, Daniel. You created a space without me. That's not what this is. Then what is it? I asked. He didn't answer. Because he couldn't. The truth doesn't leave much room for explanations. Only recognition. I didn't fight it, I continued. I didn't argue. I didn't ask to be added back. That's because. Because I understood. I said. Silence. Again. But this time it felt different. Less defensive. More exposed. And now, I added, I've made my own space. Daniel didn't speak for several seconds. When he finally did, his voice had changed. Less certain. More careful. You're making this bigger than it needs to be. I shook my head slightly, even though he couldn't see me. No, I said quietly. I'm just finally seeing it for what it is. And for the first time since the call began, he had nothing left to say. The next message didn't come from Daniel. It came from the group. I was still holding my phone. The silence from the call barely settled when the screen lit up again. Lily. Asterisk. Dad just talked to Mom. Asterisk. I didn't reply right away. I didn't need to, because a second later, another message appeared. Asterisk. They're arguing. Asterisk. I exhaled slowly, leaning back in my chair. Of course they were. Truth has a way of doing that. It doesn't sit quietly in the corner. It doesn't wait its turn. It forces its way into places people thought were stable, and shows them exactly where the cracks are. Another message came through. Asterisk, Mom said you're confusing me. Asterisk. I read that one twice. Not because it surprised me, but because it didn't. I typed carefully. Asterisk, are you confused? Asterisk. The typing bubble appeared almost immediately. Asterisk. I don't know. Asterisk. Honest. More honest than anything else that had been said in days. I nodded to myself, even though she couldn't see me. That's okay, I typed. Asterisk. You're allowed to not know yet. Asterisk. There was a pause. Then. Asterisk, Grandma. Why didn't anyone tell me before? Asterisk. That question stayed on the screen longer than the others. Because it didn't belong to this moment. It belonged to years of silence. I didn't answer it right away. Instead, I looked at the other name in the group. Richard. Still there. Still quiet. Until. Because it was easier not to, he finally wrote. I felt something shift when I read that. Not surprise. Recognition. Lily replied almost instantly. Asterisk, easier for who? Asterisk. The question hung there. Sharp. Unavoidable. Richard didn't respond. Not this time. And I understood why. Because some answers don't belong to just one person. So I stepped in. Easier for everyone who didn't want to explain it, I wrote. I let that settle. Then added. Asterisk, but not easier for the people who had to live with it. Asterisk. Silence again. But not the same kind as before. This one wasn't empty. It was full. Full of questions. Full of realization. Full of something beginning to change. Then. A new notification appeared. Not a message. A change in the group. I watched the screen carefully. Daniel Hale has been added to the group. I didn't react. I didn't stop it. I simply watched. A few seconds later his name appeared in the chat. No greeting. No explanation. Just. Asterisk, what is this? Asterisk. The same question Lily had asked earlier. But it sounded different coming from him. Less curiosity. More discomfort. I let the silence stretch this time. Then I replied. Asterisk. This is a conversation that should have happened a long time ago. Asterisk. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, another message appeared. From Lily. Asterisk, Dad, is what Grandma's saying true? Asterisk. I could almost feel the shift on the other side of the screen. The moment where avoidance stops being possible. Where silence no longer works. Daniel didn't respond right away. For the first time, he was the one hesitating. And that mattered. Because for years, he had lived inside a version of this family where the answers were already decided for him. Now, he was being asked to think for himself. To question. To choose. His typing bubble appeared. Disappeared. Came back. Then finally. Asterisk. I don't know everything. Asterisk. I read that slowly. Carefully. Because that wasn't a denial. It wasn't a defense. It was something else. Something small. But important. It was doubt. And sometimes, doubt is the beginning of truth. I didn't push him. Didn't add more. Didn't try to control where this went next. Because this wasn't my moment anymore. It was theirs. The conversation moved forward without me for a few minutes. Lily asking questions. Daniel answering carefully. Richard stepping in only when necessary. And as I sat there, watching it unfold, I realized something I hadn't expected. I wasn't being excluded anymore. I wasn't being replaced. I wasn't waiting to be heard. For the first time in a long time, I was part of something real. Not perfect. Not comfortable. But honest. And that was enough. The conversation didn't end that night. It changed. For the next few days, the group stayed active. Not constantly, not chaotically like the old one, but steadily. Carefully. Each message felt like it mattered. Like it was placed there with intention, not just habit. Lily asked questions. A lot of them. Some simple. Some uncomfortable. Some that no one in this family had ever dared to say out loud before. Daniel answered when he could. And when he couldn't, he didn't pretend anymore. That was new. Richard spoke less than the others, but when he did, his words carried weight. Not defensive. Not bitter. Just honest in a way that didn't try to impress anyone. And me? I didn't lead the conversation anymore. I didn't need to, because for the first time, the truth wasn't something I had to push forward. It was something they were reaching for themselves. 3 days later, Daniel called again. This time, his voice was different. Quieter. "Mom," he said. "Can we talk?" I agreed. He came over that evening. Alone. That more than anything, told me something had shifted. We sat in the same kitchen where this had all begun. My kitchen this time. The light softer. The air calmer. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then he said it. I didn't know. I looked at him. Not as a child. Not as someone who had failed me. Just as a man, realizing something he hadn't been ready to see before. "I know," I replied. He swallowed, his hands resting on the table in front of him. "I thought I did," he continued. "I thought I understood what happened between you and Dad. Between all of us." He let out a quiet breath. But I didn't. No excuses. No justifications. Just acknowledgement. That was enough. "I should have asked," he said. "A long time ago." I nodded slightly. "Yes," I said. "You should have." The honesty didn't hurt. It cleared something. We sat there for a while longer, talking, not about everything, not all at once, but enough to begin something different. Not a return. Not a repair of what used to be. Something new. When he left that night, he didn't say drive safe. He paused at the door. "Mom," he said. "I'm sorry." I looked at him for a moment. Then I nodded. I know. Because sometimes, understanding matters more than the words themselves. Later that night, my phone lit up again. The group. The truth. Lily had sent a message. Asterisk, "Are we still keeping this group?" Asterisk. I smiled faintly as I read it. Then Daniel replied. Asterisk, "Yeah. I think we should." Asterisk. There was a pause. Then from Richard. Asterisk, "About time." Asterisk. I let out a quiet breath, setting my phone down on the table. Not everything was fixed. Sophie hadn't joined. The old group still existed somewhere, polished, controlled, comfortable in its version of things. But it didn't matter anymore. Because I wasn't waiting to be added back. I wasn't trying to fit into a space that had quietly removed me. I had something else now. Something smaller. Something less perfect. But something real. I picked up my phone one last time and typed. Family isn't about who's included in a chat. It's about who's willing to stay when the truth shows up. I sent it. No one replied right away. They didn't need to. Because this time, no one was disappearing.